Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Sunday morning Tanya class. We're now starting today chapter 30 in the Tanya. And this could be found in your book, in your Tanya book, the bilingual edition on page 133. In chapter 29, the Alter Rebbe began to discuss the book of Tanya, as you know, is a book that discusses the Aveda, the divine worship of a Beni. Before I begin, I'd like to announce that today's class we are having in honor of Refuah Shalema, a full recovery for Patricia Naomi Bat Chava. May she have a Refuah Shalema, a full recovery, and she should be well and healthy for many, many long years. In the schus of Chanukah and Rosh Chodesh, this should be in her should stand her in good. This will be a schus for her, and our Torah learning coming on the heels of these two important days will definitely bring her great blessings. So I started saying that in chapter 29, the Alter Rebbe began discussing that the Beinoni, the intermediate person, the person that the Alter Rebbe discusses in Tanya, who is a person whose behavior is always in line with Hashem, but his inner emotions and his inner character, his perceptions, what he's attracted to, the inner person is not always in line with Hashem. And it's even possible that he or she should have a desire for things that are completely antithetical to what Hashem wants. The entire opposite. So obviously the Beinoni has to work very hard to overcome those temptations and desires, and to be completely committed to Hashem. So the Alter Rebbe went in chapter 26, he began to discuss that if you want to succeed, you have to be a happy person. You can't be depressed. And he went through chapter 26, 27, 28, and matters that bring depression, and how to overcome that, so you shouldn't be depressed. 29, he started talking about another problem that a Beinoni might have, and that is that he feels sometimes dullness, heaviness of heart, that the light of the neshama, the light of his soul, for some reason is not penetrating his heart to create within him a love for Hashem. In other words, in his mind he understands that Hashem is lovable and that it's the most worthy attraction that one can have, and he really in his mind he's fully attracted to Hashem, but it doesn't turn on his heart. He's not moved in his heart to something blockage. There's a blockage. So the Rebbe said and he calls it the blockage of the heart, or the dullness of the heart, timtum halev. And he discussed in 29 how to overcome that, and why that is, why that's happening to the person. The reason it's happening is because our lives come from klipa. The life of our animalistic soul and of Mendel. The life of the animalistic soul and the body comes from klipa. Do me a favor. Kannst du uns yeah, if you could. So we're at Dekah. We have two parts within us, as we discussed many times in Tanya. We have the neshama, the godly soul that's within each one of us, and we have the body with its human soul, or as the Tanya calls it, the animalistic soul. The body and the animalistic soul's life force comes from klipa. The other side, meaning that side that is not holy, the unholy side, that realm that is not godly, or not revealed godliness. The neshama, of course, comes from, is a piece of Hashem, is a part of Hashem. So that obviously, the life force of neshama is directly from Hashem. And these two forces are at each other's necks, you understand, as we say. There's a battle between them. the animal soul and its body is pulling in one direction. The godly soul is pulling in another direction. What happens is when we're born, we right away, as soon as we're born, we begin to, for the lack of a better word, pamper our body and animalistic soul. What do we want when we're born? We want to eat, we want to sleep, we want it now, right? We don't want to wait. And we wake up our parents and my mother and father to get our meal. And then when we're a little older, we throw a tantrum sometimes when we want something. And then when we're even older, it's a little more sophisticated, but it's basically the same thing. We're in a constant pursuit for our selfish or self-centered desires of the body and the animal soul. And the more you give in to that, you coarsen the klipa reality within your existence. And what happens is, it becomes harder and harder for the neshama's light to penetrate into your heart, to inspire your heart. So the more you have the more your klipa is strong in your life, the harder it's going to be for the neshama to penetrate and to inspire and so on and so forth. And the reality is that many of us, the klipa is pretty strong in our life. So obviously the neshama is going to have a hard time piercing through. For example, I always give the example of the window. The sun comes in, right? The light of the sun comes in. But if you put one shade, the sun will come through still, right? You may still have some light in the room, but if you cover the window with 100 shades, it's going to be pitch dark in the room. So that's what's happening in our life. The neshama is the sunlight. It's spiritual light that is there, wants to penetrate every part of us. But the animalistic side of us is the window, is the shades, is the thick hoarseness that we put to block the neshama's light. So you have to cut that down, is what the Alter Rebbe said in chapter 29. You have to really break it down, to chop it down a little bit, to break it into, and it was a lengthy chapter, and we discussed it at great length. In chapter 30, the Alter Rebbe is now going to begin to discuss another method, or an additional method, as to how to bring down the klipa within yourself, to make yourself feel, because what the Alter Rebbe said in 29 was that you really have to begin to feel and to recognize the lowliness of your klipa reality within your life, your animalistic soul, your Yetzer Hara, your body, which is pampered by the animalistic drives and so on. You have to really see how despicable it is. And one way to do it is by thinking about all the sins you did in the past and how that caused you to be distant from Hashem, and so on and so forth. Chapter 30, the Alter Rebbe says another method. How to feel yourself small. Because that's really what it's about. If you want to crush a little bit your ego and your animalistic klipa reality, you have to feel that it's really lowly. And then you'll despise it. You'll be able to release yourself from it a little bit. So now he's going to say in chapter 30 that the way to do it, I'll give you a basic outline of chapter, I'm just very quickly, chapter 30, the Alter Rebbe is going to say that the way what a person has to do is to see himself truly as lower than everyone else in the world around him. You should really believe that you are the lowliest person around. Is that a good idea? Well, let's see how the Alter Rebbe discusses it. This also, a person must resolve in his heart to fulfill the instruction of our rabbis, of Blessed Marian. This is a Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. It says over there, a person should be humble and be humble of spirit before all men. Veheveish fal ruach b'fnei kol ha'odam. Be of humble spirit before all people, all men. Men mean over here is everyone, men, women, means people. Now, when you read that in the Pirkei Avot, if you did, you were aware of such an instruction in the Mishnah? That veheveish fal ruach b'fnei kol adam. You should be humble of spirit before all men. Meaning you should feel less than everyone. That everyone is better than you. Did you think that that's a realistic, good piece of advice? What do you think?
Depends on perspective.
Depends on perspective. No,
Yeah,
the
I would
Mishnah
say
is not
yes.
saying that
I
it
would-
should.
I
The
would
Mishnah
say
is not saying it depends on perspective. The Mishnah is giving you a straightforward direction. You should be humble of spirit before all men. And let's just read another couple of those lines.
Yes, I would
And
say.
this, guess what?
That's a good idea.
It's a good idea. That means you should feel lower than the criminal in jail. In your
what
own
way-
estimation,
in
you
what
should
way
feel
should you feel lower?
that he's better than you.
In what way is he better than me?
I don't know. What
In
do you
all
think?
ways.
I don't know. What do you think?
There's a lot of ways.
What do you think it means?
Spiritually. In the way that you
Let's say spiritually.
compose yourself.
Should you think that the criminal in jail is higher than you spiritually?
No, it doesn't mean that you should think that he's higher than you. It
So
should-
what does it mean?
My interpretation of it is it means you should not be arrogant.
No, that's not what it's saying there. Let's read a few more lines. That's one way. That's not what the Mishnah is saying. A lot of people think that that's what the Mishnah is saying, but that's not what the Mishnah is saying. Let's read a few more lines. This you must be in true sincerity, in the presence of any individual, even in the presence of the most worthless of worthless men. This is very strong. He's saying what he's trying to say is, you may think that when the Mishnah says you should be lower, feel humbled of spirit before all people, it means you should act that way. That when you see someone in front of you, you should be humble. You should be in a humble spirit, but not that in your mind you should really believe that you're lower than that person.
Could be eye level.
No, not eye level. That's not what we mean. We mean
Judge him favorably.
Wait a minute. You would think that there's two ways you can understand this Mishnah, this instruction. One is that when you come in contact with any person, show humility, be humble, don't be arrogant, as you say, or even more, be lowly in front of that person. Put him first. Give him the feeling that he's, on a higher level than you. But should you, in action, in practice, but should you internally believe that you're lower than that person? No. Alter Rebbe is saying yes. Read the words. This you must be in true sincerity. That's what he's trying to emphasize in this word, in this line. This is not some fake idea that just in practice you should humble yourself before all people, but in your mind or in your heart, maybe you should feel that in truth that person is probably not higher than you. He's saying no. This you must be in true sincerity, because in the presence of any individual, even in the presence of the most worthless of worthless people. In other words, don't think in your mind that you're really higher than the worthless person. But when in your behavior, you'll be humble before him. That is not what the Mishnah is saying. The Mishnah is saying clearly, you should truly feel that you are lower than that person before every single person in the world. It's an amazing concept when you think about it. Is that even possible? First of all, is it even possible? Second of all, is it even advisable? Why is it even advisable to feel lower than every single other person in the world? I went a couple of years on Chanukah and Purim to celebrate Chanukah and Purim, to bring the holiday to the maximum security prisons in New York State, in Attica. I don't know if you ever heard of Attica. Bad place, that prison, bad people. Alter Rebbe Mishnah is saying, when I'm sitting in the presence of those who were about 8 guys, you Jews in that prison, we celebrated Purim with them, because at the end of the day, they are Jewish and they should have Purim, even behind bars. Should I feel like I'm lower than these 6 people or 8 people? That's what the Mishnah is saying. And the Mishnah wouldn't tell me that there's something false. If the Mishnah tells me to feel that way, it means really, you should really feel that way. I'm lower than the murderer. I'm lower than the scoundrel. I'm lower than the thief. So how could this be? That means you should really believe this. You should really have that perception. And it means before every single person, even the worthless of the worthless. I gave you the example of the worst of the worst. But even not that, should you feel lower than even every person walking in the street that you meet at a party? Maybe you're better than them. Maybe it could be that you truly are better than them. Everyone's less than me. I'm the worst person in the world. What does this mean? How about if you know someone is not a good person and you don't have those sins that person committed? Why would you feel that person is higher than you? So the Alter Rebbe explains this at great length. This is the main point of this chapter. If you will have that feeling, if it's in truth, that will crush your ego and your klipa. That will crush your klipa. You'll feel insignificant. Is that a bad thing? We will see soon that's not a bad thing at all. Let's begin the process. This accords with the instruction of our sages also in the Pirkei Avot. Judge not thy fellow until you have come to his place. You're never allowed to judge anyone else. What does that mean? If you see someone do something wrong, you're not allowed to say, wait a minute, that guy is doing something terrible. The Mishnah says, no, you're not allowed to judge that person. Till you come to his place. What does that mean, come to his place? So the Alter Rebbe is going to say two place means two things, two places. Physical place and spiritual, psychological place. Let's see. For in his place, for it is his place that causes him to sin. Because, for example, his livelihood requires him to go to the market for the whole day and to be one of those who sit at the street corners, where his eyes behold all the temptations, and the eye sees and the heart desires, and his evil nature is kindled like a baker's red-hot oven. Your heart starts, goes on fire to have these temptations. It's not just like a regular house oven. It's like a baker's oven, which is much hotter, right? You ever went to a matzah bakery oven? That's 1,300 degrees. What's the oven in your house? 500. So the baker's oven is much hotter. And this, let's read till the end of the paragraph. As is written in Hosea, it burneth as a flaming fire. It is different, let's go further, it is different, however, with him, who goes but little to the marketplace, and who remains in his house for the greater part of the day. And even if he spends the whole day in the market, but is possibly not so passionate by nature, for the evil inclination of all people is not the same. There's one whose nature, etc., is one way, and as is explained elsewhere. The Alter Rebbe said over here two things. I'm going to explain this, and then we'll read it again, perhaps. He's saying like this. You have a person who his day is spent in the marketplace, on the outside world. What happens when you go to the outside world? If your job is on La Sola Street or on South Beach, that's what your job is. You have to be out there all day long, selling, buying products, whatever, you're visiting customers. You're out in the street the whole time. The marketplace sometimes is not a very pleasant, or not a very spiritual place. There are all kinds of not so holy images that the eyes just behold because you're there. You don't even have control. Obviously, when you see something that's not proper, you should not focus on it. You should right away remove your mind from it, and your eyes especially. But what happens if you just see it? You're driving in the street, you see a billboard that's very inappropriate. So this person may be spending 10 hours a day in such environments, yeah? The person you are looking down at, or this person that's a sinful person, very sinful person, right? his place is maybe a big cause for his downfall. The place that he is in, where he must spend most of his day, is not a holy place. On the other hand, you, perhaps, you sit in an office all day, or you have a different type of job that doesn't bring you to such places, where you don't see such images, and you don't see such temptations. And that person, that's the first thing. That's the first meaning of the word place. The physical place. You're in one place, he's in somewhere else. Now, even if you are in the same environment as him, let's say you both work at the same, you have both the same situation. But then the Alter Rebbe says there's also a spiritual place. You are a very cold-blooded person. Your temptation of your heart is not strong. Your Yetzer Hara is not so passionate. You're not like a baker's oven. That other guy, the minute he sees a non-proper image, an inappropriate image, he's like, his Yetzer Hara goes nuts and brings him down, and he can't fight the temptation. Or he could, but it's very, very difficult. Extremely difficult. So his psychological, spiritual place is not the same psychological, spiritual place as you, even though the physical place may be the same. So you're both working in environments that you both see the same thing, and you're there. There's no difference in that aspect. But now consider something else. You don't have the same Yetzer Hara as he does, and the Yetzer Haras are not the same for everyone. Yetzer Hara means the evil inclination. The evil inclination is not the same for everyone. Some evil inclinations are very, very strong. Some people have such passions that they're on fire like a baker's oven for temptations, for physical temptations. And it becomes a very, very strong, difficult battle for them to overcome. You don't have that. So how could you judge that person? That's number one, the Alter Rebbe says. He explains what the Mishnah means. Don't judge anyone until you come to his place. Place means both the physical environment that he's in and the spiritual, psychological environment that he finds himself. You're not the same as him. So you can never judge a person till you come to his place. The reality is that you can never come to his place because you don't know that person's psychological reality. So the bottom line is you can never judge anyone. You should never judge anyone. That clear? Now let's move on. It's not done yet. Let's read it again. 4. We're on page 133 in the middle of the column over there, in the right column, but number 2. For in his place, I'm just reading it again. For it is his place that causes him to sin, because his livelihood requires him to go to the market for the whole day, and to be one of those who sit at the street corners, where his eyes behold all the temptations, and then what happens? The eye sees, and then the heart desires, right? The eye, and his evil nature is kindled like a baker's red-hot oven. As it is written in Oshay, it burneth like a flaming fire. So what do you want from that guy? It is different, however, with you, or him, the one who's judging, right? Who goes but little to the marketplace, and who remains in his house for the greater part of the day. Or even if he does spend the whole day in the marketplace, like that other person, but is possibly not so passionate by nature, for the evil inclination of all people is not the same. There's one whose nature is one thing, and someone else is less, as is explained elsewhere. So you really have no right to judge anyone. Understand, yeah? Then he continues. Now the Alter Rebbe turns his attention to the person, that lowly person who's sinning, who is in such a bad place physically and maybe even spiritually. Does he have an excuse for sinning? Is that a proper excuse for him to sin? So Alter Rebbe is going to say right away, no way. It's not an excuse to sin. For the person who's judging him, you have no right to judge, or whoever. But now he's addressing that lowlier person. Is that really an excuse for a person to sin? The Alter Rebbe is going to say no. Look what he says. In truth, however, even he, whose nature is extremely passionate, and whose livelihood obliges him to sit all day at the street corners, has no excuse whatever for his sins, and he is termed an utter evildoer, a Rasha Gomur, because there is no dread of God before his eyes. He should have the fear of heaven before his eyes. He has no excuse. You're right, yeah, God gave you a stronger evil inclination. But if he gave you a stronger evil inclination, he also gave you the power to overcome it. God never gives you more than you can handle. So when I'm looking at that person and I'm judging him, I have no right to judge him, because who am I to? I don't know this person's temptations. I'm not in his place, so I have no right to say anything. But the person who's sinning, the Alter Rebbe is saying to him, wait a minute, it's no excuse. You may have your right. Life brings you to Las Vegas for the trade shows, and you're hanging around in places that are not so good. You have to go to Sin City every once in a while, and you have a heart that's gone meshuga on fire. It's like a baker's oven. You're 100% right. God gave you a difficult job, but he also gave you the ability to overcome. You have to, at the end of the day, you have the ability to choose whether to sin or not. Freedom of choice has never been taken away from anyone. So you're right, you see things, turn your face away. And you have
in the U.S.
In the
U.S.
What in the U.S.?
Freedom of choice. I'm saying there are people around the world that don't actually have freedom of choice.
No, but sinning, they have a freedom of choice to sin.
To sin. Right.
Yeah, we're talking about sin. Yeah. So every person has freedom of choice to sin. So you're right. You got a difficult deal in life. Hashem gave you a strong Yetzer Hara. You're going to have to deal with it. Because at the same time that he gave you this very passionate evil inclination, he also gave you the ability to overcome it. He's never going to give you more than you can handle, obviously. God is going to be fair with us. But some of us he gives an easy Yetzer Hara, some of us he gives a hard one. I'm sorry. That's the way it is. Yeah, that everyone's told someone. God never signed a contract to have an easy life with us, right? Never signed a contract with us for an easy life. No, but really, so he's addressing the sinner now. The person who finds himself in such bad situations and he has a very big temptation in his heart, that's not an excuse to sin. You should have the fear of God before you. There is a God, and you also know there's a God. So it's a little harder. Muster up the strength. You have no excuse to sin. Let's read it in his words. In truth, however, even he whose nature is extremely passionate and whose livelihood obliges him to sit all day at the street corners, but has no excuse whatever for his sins. And he is termed another evildoer, Rasha Gomer, because there is no dread of God before his eyes. For he should have controlled himself and restrained the impulse of his desire in his heart because of the fear of God, who sees all the actions, as has been explained above. What did he explain above? In chapter 12, if you remember, those who were here then, Alter Rebbe laid out a very important rule in life. And that is, he mentions it, that for the mind has a supremacy over the heart by nature. At the end of the day, what your mind has the power to control the heart. What's stronger, your mind or your heart? If your mind knows one thing, that you should go in one direction, and your heart is tempting you to go in another direction, who has supremacy? If you battle it out, the mind doesn't want to do it, the heart does. Who's stronger? The mind. That's by nature. That's not some spiritual gift. That's by nature. Every person is born that way. The mind is in control of the heart. Now, you have to be ready to battle it out. Sometimes the mind doesn't want to win the heart. The mind is going along with the heart. So it's a different story. But when the mind is putting up a fight against the heart, the mind will win. Therefore, this person, whose heart is on fire like a baker's oven, you do have a mind, and in your mind you know that this is wrong, and you know that God doesn't want you to do this, and you should have fear of God in your mind. You should be able to, you could, if you want, overcome the temptation. So to the sinner, no excuse. But now back to the person who's seeing that person's sin. Are you allowed to judge him? You have no right to judge him. Because really, when you think about it, had you been in that place, or in that psychological, spiritual place, had you had those temptations as he has, and a powerful Yetzer Hara like he, well, I don't know, maybe you wouldn't overcome the temptation. Maybe you would even be worse than that person. Had you both given the same lot in life, on a psychological and a physical level, I'm not sure that I would be better than that person. maybe I would be worse. So you don't know. So you can never judge him. You can never pass, judgment on anyone else. What were you going to say?
If you, for example, two brothers grew up in the same house with the same parents, the same environment.
Right.
One go to the jail and the other one become a professor or doctor, whatever.
Yeah.
They have the same condition, the same everything.
They don't have this. You don't know that. You made the physical conditions are all the same, but the psychological condition you don't know if it's the
what you
same.
said that everyone is different.
Right.
No matter.
Just because you come from the same mother and father doesn't mean that your evil inclinations are working at the same, strength. And that's why you can never really judge another person, because you are never going to be in someone else's place. So therefore, you have no right to judge, period.
What would you call judging? What would
Saying that person is less than you.
What would somebody have to do or think for somebody to have to judge?
Look at that person. He's terrible. He's less than me. I'm better than him.
So by putting yourself above somebody else.
Yeah.
What about for thinking that what that person did was wrong?
It is wrong.
Judging?
No, everyone knows what's right and what's wrong. If you see someone sinning, you know that it's wrong. Judging over here means that you say to yourself, obviously we know that the person is doing something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Alter Rebbe is not suggesting that you should go around thinking that when someone does a terrible sin, you should say maybe it's not a terrible sin. That's not what he's saying. We know what's a sin and what's good, what's a positive deed. What he's saying is when you see someone sin, never think to yourself that person is lower than you. Maybe not. Maybe you're lower than him.
We don't know what they were born into. What
Right.
kind of poverty.
You don't know.
What kind of abuse.
All kinds of circumstances. So therefore, but it's much more than that. Alter Rebbe is saying even more than that. Alter Rebbe is saying that, let's analyze this in the following way. Let's say you see someone, Yankel is doing something terrible. He's not behaving properly. He's sinning from all kinds of sinful behavior. And you see it. Say, Yankel is terrible. What kind of terrible person is this? Well, the sin is terrible, no question about that. Alter Rebbe is not saying you should overlook that the sin is, turn the sin into positive. That the sin is a sin. But does that mean that you are better than him? Absolutely not. And for the following reason. Analyze yourself for a moment. You feel yourself, you would never do such a sin. Right? You say to yourself, I would never do that. So I'm better than him. Because I would never do that. Well, you're right, you would never do that because you were given one type of evil inclination, which is a very, very, it's on a small flame, So you don't have the temptation to begin with to do those things. And you're not dealing with the type of Yetzer Hara as the other person's dealing with. But were you given that person's Yetzer Hara? How about if you were given that person Yetzer Hara? Do you know how you would behave? You don't really know. Maybe you would be even worse than what he's doing. Maybe you would be doing much worse than what that person's doing. In other words, what the Alter Rebbe is saying here, and this is important because Tanya always gets to the deeper aspects of the nefesh, of the soul, right? What makes a person good and bad?
His deeds.
His deeds make a person bad, but it's much more than the deeds. Why does a bad deed make you bad?
It's a bad deed.
What does it mean when you sin? What does it mean? You don't have the fear of heaven before you. You're not in touch with God. You're going against Hashem. Right? So you see someone doing something that's the opposite of what Hashem wants. He sinned in a terrible way. You say, wow, look at that person. Doesn't care about God. Doesn't have a sense of a higher authority, no fear of heaven, none of you. So Alter Rebbe says, wait a minute, let's take a look at that. You're saying that person has no fear of heaven. Do you have fear of heaven? Let's analyze your fear of heaven for a minute. Let's analyze our fear of heaven. So granted, that person sinned, right? He doesn't have fear of heaven. Let's take a look at ourselves for a minute. If I was given that deal, if I was given that temptation, and that level of Yetzer Hara, and that evil inclination, that passionate evil inclination, would I be better? Could be not. Very possibly not. And the Alter Rebbe is now going to illustrate this. How we know that, not so sure that you would be better. So when you get down to the real essence of it, you may not be better. In reality, you may not be better than that person. Because what are we measuring over here? The action or the inner character? We're measuring here the inner character. Maybe you would be, maybe at the end of the day, do you have more fear of heaven than that person? I'm not sure. Maybe not. You just don't have that evil inclination that he has. You were never in Las Vegas. You were never in places that pull you to bad behavior. So of course, technically, you've never sinned that way. But internally, are you incapable of sinning that way? I'm not so sure. So maybe your fear of heaven is not any better than his. It's just that you technically have never been in a position, in a place where you would be pulled in such directions. And you may never be, because your Yetzer Hara to begin with is a lowly Yetzer Hara. Is a much more less. But if you were, and now the Alter Rebbe is going to say, let's see how you're battling your Yetzer Hara in the Yetzer Hara that you do have. And that's the next part of this chapter. He's going to measure up. Now take a look at how are you battling your Yetzer Hara. Because what is Avodas Hashem? What does ultimately serving Hashem mean? To overcome your Yetzer Hara, to overcome your evil inclination. That's what it's all about. To battle the negative forces within and overcome and do good. Are you battling? In the areas that you should be battling, how's that battle doing? Let's take a look in his words. We're on page 135, in the left column right in the middle with that triangle, the second triangle. It is indeed a great and fierce struggle to break one's passion. It's not easy at all. Which burns like a fiery flame. Again, it is indeed a great and fierce struggle to break one's passion which burns like a fiery flame through fear of God. It's not so easy to break that Yetzer Hara because of your fear of God. Maybe your fear, it's not so easy. It is like an actual test. Therefore, each person, according to his place and rank in the service of God, must weigh and examine his position as to whether he is serving God in a manner commensurate with the dimensions of such a fierce battle and test. In the realm of do good, in other words, you have to measure battle to battle. That person's battle and your battles. Okay? Let's take a look at our own battles. What are your battles? What does your Yetzer Hara look like? Your evil inclination look like? Let's talk about, so you're saying, I've never sinned this bad. I'm not such a sinner. Okay. I'll give it to you. I'll agree with you. So first of all, the Rebbe said you don't have those temptations. So don't rush to judgment, because who knows what you would be if you did have those temptations. But now let's see how you do in the areas where you do have to battle your Yetzer Hara, which means how big is your fear of heaven? You're downgrading that person. He doesn't have any fear of heaven. Let's see your fear of heaven. What does fear of heaven demand of you? To learn Torah every free moment?
Humility.
1 second. He's giving 3 examples. He's going to give 3 examples. Learn Torah. How much do you have to learn Torah? If you're a God-fearing person, what does God really want from you? Every free moment, perhaps? No? Yeah, the law is that you should learn every free moment. Do you learn every free moment? Is it hard to learn every free moment? Very hard. It's not easy at all. It's hard enough to learn an hour a week, an hour a day. Every free moment, how many free moments a day do you have, for real? So you have to work, let's say, 8, 9 hours. What's your work day look like? 9, 10, let's even say 10. How many hours do you need to sleep? 7. Let's say 7. We'll give you an extra hour, 7.
5 hours.
No, let's go 7.
No, you have 5 hours.
Wait a minute. So you have, what are you now? That you got 10 plus 7 is 17.
Hour of exercise.
You have 7 hours now. How many hours do you need for your food, for your meals? Say an hour and a half. You don't need more than that, right? Even if you have to cook it. Let's say an hour and a half for your meals. Doesn't take more than an hour and a half to eat. So you're now 5.5 extra hours. I'll give you an hour of exercise. You got an hour and a half.
Say 30
you have
minutes.
an hour of
Take
exercise.
30 minutes.
You're down to 4.5 hours of time. What are you doing in that time?
What if
So
you
let's
have
say
to
you have
travel
to. Okay.
to work?
Okay.
I gotta go to Abington.
Fine. So that's that part of the 10 hours. First of all, you can learn in your car. You can learn in
you
your
can
car.
include it as part of
You
the
can
10
learn in
hours.
your car.
It's actually sometimes the best place to learn.
Honestly speaking,
true.
you have 4.5 hours free time that you're not bogged down with anything. I gave you an hour exercise, 7 hours of good sleep, 10 hours of work, an hour and a half of eating. You still have 4.5 hours. How hard is it for you to sit down 4.5 hours a day and sit and learn? Let's even say you need an hour to just, catch up on the news, and
davening.
stock market.
Davening.
Davening, true. You need to have 2 hours of davening.
Not 2 hours.
An hour and a half.
No.
Good. An hour and a half of davening.
If you're doing Shabbos Mekamarev outside of shul, maybe 45 minutes.
No, let's even say an hour and a half. You still have 3 hours. You're right. Davening is part of it. 3 hours of learning. Let's give you a half hour to catch up on news, which I'm not even sure that's permitted. It could be that's.
Hold on.
It
You're
could be
assuming
that's.
we don't have any kids.
I'm talking about if you have kids. What's this got to do with
So
anything?
then you gotta tack on
Spend time
some.
with your kids, for example.
You gotta tack on some kids time.
Tack on to
dressing them. I'm about to be a father, so
Okay,
I don't know.
fine.
Any parents? Okay,
No
so
problem.
help me out here.
I'll give you. Would you agree?
Spend
Would
time
all
with
of
your
you
kids.
agree that we have 2.5 hours a day to learn? I think we can all agree on that.
Absolutely.
If you really got down to it. How hard is it to you to
hour.
actually sit down for 2.5 hours a day, every day, and learn? I was very, very liberal with the hours I gave you for non-learning time. 2.5 hours, we can all agree we can find. How many of us do? How hard is it to do that? It's a big discipline. It's a very big discipline. To say that I'm going to start learning now the free time of my day. 2.5 hours. Now, I feel that in the car, the half hour back and forth is another hour, which you can put in a CD and learn Torah.
I'm gonna start doing it
So it's 3.5 hours. How many of us will do this? It's not so easy. It's a big battle with the Yetzer Hara. This is in the do-good area. We are not talking about staying away from sin, refraining from the bad. We're talking about the do-good. That's also part of serving God. So you have to battle your Yetzer Hara. Yetzer Hara is not really interested in you sitting and learning for 3 hours a day. So it tells you, hey, there's a good movie, there's a good this, let's go out to the restaurant, let's do this, let's do that. It gives you all kinds of... Now, what do you do during those 3 hours? You're on your phone, you're doing all kinds of things, reading a book, whatever you're doing. You're not learning. The Yetzer Hara is in a battle with you now. Your Yetzer Hara tells you there's better things to do, and those are temptations for you. Those are temptations for you to take an extra hour, sit and, and watch a movie. Those are temptations. Yetzer Hara is now telling you don't learn the 3 hours you could. And you listen to the Yetzer Hara. You lost the battle. You keep losing the battle to the Yetzer Hara. So let's see who's better than who. So that person is in Sin City. That's where life brings him. His work brings him, or not, or whatever. I'm giving extremes. But even on the street, in the world, he sees things he's lost. His temptations are working overtime on him because of circumstances. So you judged him and said he should have overcome that evil inclination of his, right? Have you overcome yours? Let me ask you now, which is a bigger battle? to fight the temptation of the physical attraction that's pulling him in a very, his heart is on fire like a baker's oven. What the Alter Rebbe is basically talking about, we can all imagine. He's talking about the sins involved with bad images, immodesty, and things of that nature. Is that harder to overcome than to learn an extra half hour a day? Which is a harder battle?
I would say
Which is a harder passion? A harder fight with the Yetzer Hara?
it's probably very close. But it shouldn't be.
I don't know, because I can't judge.
But what would you think? No, you could. You know yourself. You could think,
It's a hard.
but it's possible, but it's quite possible that the Yetzer Hara, in the sin of whatever, of the immodest behavior, is much stronger than the Yetzer Hara that tells you not to learn. It's a bigger battle to overcome. And yet, in the smaller battle, we fail, and we're judging him. Maybe he's better than you. You're losing the battle on smaller temptations than he is. Think of it that way. That's because it's the truth. You understand what I'm saying? Avanta?
But I understood that the Alter Rabbi meant that every person, it doesn't matter which level of fear of God he is. Like, for example, you, for example, pray Shacharit, Mincha, Arvit, and I, for example, pray only Shacharit in my house.
Okay.
Now, if I'm going to take on myself, I'm going to tell to myself, okay, from today on, I'm going to try to say Mincha.
Okay.
And you're going to say, okay, my only off day, because you are here in the synagogue most of the Saturday, and you're going to say, okay, Sunday, I'm going to spend time with my family, but you decided to take Tanya class on you, for example. So, basically, I think what he meant that every person need to take even a little step for the level that he's staying, and to commit it and to do it.
There's no question about it. But what he's talking about here is something a little different. He's saying, the Mishnah tells a person, you should see yourself lower than every other person. What is this based on? And how could one do this? You know a lot of people sin in worse sins than you do. You're not guilty of those sins that they committed. So why should you feel less than them? So the Alter Rebbe is saying,
failed.
what?
You by yourself failed in this struggling. For example, for me it was struggling
in other words,
to come here to
the Alter Rebbe, the
this class,
first,
because I have a million things
correct.
to do. But I came.
That's exactly what he's saying. But when we don't come, it's not when the. Let me illustrate this again. The Alter Rebbe first is saying when the Mishnah says you should see yourself lower than everyone else, humble before everyone else, not just in action but in true feeling internally. He's taking you away from what the act that person did to the nefesh of it, to the soul of it. In other words, you're saying that you're better than him because he sinned in a very grotesque sin and you're not guilty of that. So the Alter Rebbe is saying, you're right, that grotesque sin you didn't do. But why did he do it? Because he has no fear of heaven, right? Let's take a look at your fear of heaven for a moment. Well, you have to analyze that person's station in life. What causes him to sin? He has a Yetzer Hara that's way over rated than you, way stronger than yours, perhaps. So therefore, you can never judge. You don't know what you would be like if you had those temptations. And then the Alter Rebbe says, let's take a look at your own temptations. What are your temptations? To learn more. You don't have a fiery Yetzer Hara that's driving you to go into bad places, into sinful things of sexual nature. But where is your Yetzer Hara pulling you? It's pulling you away from learning, which you do have time to learn, and it's telling you watch a movie, play tennis, some other thing. Why are you not listening to the Yetzer Hara? Why are you listening to Yetzer Hara? Why is the fear of God not strong enough in your heart to say to yourself, wait a minute, God wants me not to learn, not play tennis. In other words, you're losing your battles. Your little battles you're losing, right? Are they as big battles as his? Maybe not. Maybe his battles are bigger. So you're losing smaller battles than him. So who's better and who's worse? I'm not so sure anymore. Quite possible that we're lower than him. Let's see it in the Alter Rebbe's words. It is indeed a great and fierce struggle to break one's passion, which burns like a fire flame. That's a major battle that person has through fear of God, right? That the fear of God should cause him that he should be so strong not to overcome the passions. It is like a real actual test. Therefore, each person, according to his place and rank in the service of God, must weigh and examine his position as to whether he is serving God in a manner commensurate with the dimensions of such a fierce battle and test. Let's take a look at your tests. In the realm of do good, for example, yeah? As, for example, in the service of prayer with kavanah. The first example the Alter Rebbe gives is prayer, devotion. How does your prayer look? You know how you're supposed to pray. God wants you to concentrate on every word you're saying, to understand and be with kavanah and pure devotion, pouring out his soul before God with entire strength, to the point of exhaustion of the soul. This is deep prayer that's demanded of us, while waging war against his body and animal soul within it, which impede his devotion. When you daven, you're trying to muster up the kavanah, the proper intent, the devotion. Your body is pulling you in a different direction, right? Your body is lazy to do that. It's an exertion to do this. So you have a battle, right? It's not so simple. It's a strenuous war to beat and grind them like dust, each day before the morning and evening prayer. You have to crush your body and animal soul who's not letting you exert that devotion and prayer. Also during prayer, he needs to exert himself with the exertion of the spirit and of the flesh, as will be explained later at length. Chapter 42. So you're davening, yeah? Why don't you exert that? Why don't you overcome the battle against your body and your animal soul, which is hampering your ability to daven, and you don't overcome that, and you daven very, very quick, and you're not so devoted? Because you don't have the fear of heaven. So he doesn't have the fear of heaven, and we just found out that you don't either. Who's worse? Maybe your lack of fear of heaven is worse than his lack of fear of heaven. After all, look what he says. Anyone who has not reached this standard of waging such a strenuous war against his body has not yet measured up to the quality and dimension of the war waged by one's evil nature, which burns like a fiery flame, that it be humbled and broken by dread of God. When you measure your battle and that battle, you have not yet reached the level of battle that one needs to serve Hashem. He has a much stronger battle than you, and you're maybe even failing in your own small battles. They're not so small. I'm not saying that the battle against your bodies, which is getting in the way of you exerting all your strength in prayer, it's not a small battle. But we just found out that we both have major battles. He's dealing with issues of immodesty in the street. You're dealing with prayer. You're not battling your own internal struggles to pray better or to learn better. All the Alter Rebbe is saying over here is one thing: you're talking not better than that other person. You really are not.
I think
you don't really know. In other words, you don't know. You have no idea if you're better than that person. It's very possible that he's better than you, ultimately in fearing God. Because if you would be both at the same place, who knows?
I think it might have something to do with the perspective upon somebody and how they interpret the importance of prayers in their life and how they were raised to think about how prayers impact their life.
True. That's true.
Why do I feel, for example, taking my own case, that prayers are important? I heard an anecdote from somebody who said that prayers, when you pray, it's like a long time ago, and when soldiers pray before battle, their words are, and this is the context that was being used in thousands of years ago, So you would pray because you knew that the words would go ahead of your physical body and protect you in the spiritual world before your physical body, you actually went to war. So by praying 3 times a day, you're sending words to God, to angels to protect you, and looking at it from that context or that perspective. And if you learn about what the importance of prayer, I think somebody would take prayer more seriously.
There's no question about that, Brian. Here's the point that I think I should emphasize.
Like you said,
again.
everyone at their own level.
I think I should emphasize this once again. The Alter Rebbe is talking about judging another person. Why are you judging that? Why do you say he's lowly? Because look what he's doing. He's such a sinful person. Let's go one step further. So he sinned, big deal. Well, what do you mean big deal? There's no fear of God. He's disregarding God's will. Oh, so now we're measuring who's disregarding God's will more. That's what it's about. It's not about what type of sin you did. We're judging the inner character of the person. You're a better person than him because you have more fear of heaven than him. Let's analyze that. How do we know this? That's what the Alter Rebbe is saying. He's not saying you know more than him. It ultimately gets down to who's a better person internally. You're thinking that you are better because look what he does. And you're not guilty of that type of sin. He's a cheater. He's a liar. He's not faithful to his spouse. He's a terrible person. And me, I've never even got close to such a type of sin. So obviously I'm better than him. Okay, so the Alter Rebbe says, wait a minute. What does better mean? If you're measuring the sin you did, you're measuring the type of sin, then you're going to be right. You never did that type of sin. But the Alter Rebbe is saying that's not how you measure people. You measure people by their devotion to God. So you're saying, oh, but I'm more devoted to God. I never did that. Oh, so now you're going one step in, the devotion to God. And you're measuring your devotion to God compared to his by what he did as opposed to what you did. You never did such terrible things. So the Alter Rebbe says, okay, you're right, you never did that. But why didn't you do that? And why did he do it? Because of the battle he has against the Yetzer Hara. Ultimately, that's what it comes down to. How much are you battling the Yetzer Hara to be devoted to Hashem? He failed. You're right, he failed. He or she failed. Why did they fail? You're saying, no, I don't fail there. You don't? First of all, how do you know? I never did that. Well, you don't know how you would behave if you had the same circumstances that he has. That's number one. So you don't even begin to know the real inner character of you against him. Because you don't deal with those temptations. You don't deal with that type of Yetzer Hara. Had you dealt with the same Yetzer Hara, evil inclination that is, would you be better? Maybe yeah, maybe not. Well, let's take a look at your Yetzer Hara for now. Let's take a stop and see what does your Yetzer Hara look like. What are your battles in life? What's the last battle you had? Well, I didn't pray well. Well, why didn't you? It wasn't easy. To fight my body is lazy, it takes a lot out of me to daven. You're right. You're right. It takes a lot out of you. So for you, that's a major battle. Did you win the battle? You didn't win it this morning. So he didn't win his battle, and you didn't win your battle. Which was a stronger battle? They were both strong. Maybe not. Maybe his was stronger than yours. And yet you had a lesser battle than him and you failed. So who's more distant than God, you or him? It turns out that you're not so sure anymore. It could be a taka worse than him. It could be in the final analysis, you're more distant from God than he is. It's just that God did you a kindness and he never put you in such bad places, so you're never really doing such terrible things. But the inner, when you look internally in your heart, in your mind, in your devotion to God, I'm not so sure you're more devoted to God than he is. You're just very lucky that you don't have to deal with that kind of thing. But the things you do have to deal with, you're not such a big tzaddik either.
So I want to ask you, even tzaddik cannot judge. what you're saying?
But tzaddik can't either judge, because tzaddik is not either in that person's place. No one's in that person's place. You can never judge another person. Not only can you never judge him, the Alter Rebbe is not going to go back in the end. We're not going to do it today, but the point is, it ends up that you may be lower than everyone else. It's very, very possible that in the end, in the final analysis, when you look deep inside, you take a bigger scoundrel than that person in potential. In potential. Which means that if you potentially could do that, had you been in that situation, then you take a worse than him. Or the same as him, at least. And maybe you would do worse. If you potentially... In other words, you get it. The battle is what we're talking about. We're talking about the battle against your Yetzer Hara. That's what it boils down to. That's how you judge people. How are you battling your evil inclination? Are you succeeding? Are you devoted to Hashem to crush the Yetzer Hara or not? That's what devotion means. That's how you judge.
There's a saying, never to judge someone before you walk a mile in that person's shoes.
It's the same. That's what the Alter Rebbe is saying. That's what he's talking about. And the point is, he's saying you can never walk in that person's shoes. It's impossible. Because even if you can be in the exact same shoes and the exact same place, like you said, I'm his brother, I had the same parents, we had the same school, the same teachers, we went through the same process. And look what he looks like when he's 20, and then look what I look like when I'm 20. He's doing drugs, he's into who knows what, and I'm a good guy. I'm in college getting A's on my, serving God, doing very well. That makes you better? Well, maybe not. If you're measuring how many sins you did in comparison to that person, then if that's your measure, then maybe you're better. But that's not how you measure. You have to measure what's going on inside. Are you devoted to Hashem ultimately? You think you are. And maybe you are. Maybe, I don't know. Let's see. Let's take a look. How are your battles against your Yetzer Hara looking? You start looking in the mirror, they're not so fine, not so nice. So, when you realize that our lowliness, and potentially we're lower than everyone else, it's just that we're lucked out a little bit in life, where we're not given the same temptations and struggles that the other people have, that doesn't make you a better person. It just makes you a luckier person. It doesn't make you a better person. So just because if someone says, I'm richer than that person because I won a lottery of $1 million. So if you're counting money, you're richer, you're right. But how about if you start counting effort? What was the effort to get that $1 million for you? Nothing. What was the effort for that person to get his $1,000 that he has?
A lot.
A lot. So, God gave you a gift. That makes you better than him? I'm learning better than the other person, yeah? I'm learning more hours than him. Look at him. He doesn't spend time learning Torah. I do. That makes you better than him. God gave you a gift. You like learning. You have a good head. You had a good set of parents that gave you the value of learning Torah. You got a gift from God. That makes you a better person. You won a lottery. That makes you a better person. You won a spiritual lottery. How does that make you better? So this is not how you measure better and worse, because you learn more than him. He may not have the good head to learn. He may not have the education to the importance of learning. He may not have the sitzfleisch, as we say in Yiddish. He has ants in his pants. He can't sit for 5 minutes. He has ADD or whatever it is. You don't. You had a gift from God. You're taking credit for that. That makes you better. So now, obviously, if you have a gift from God and you use it properly, that's good. That's good. And the person, and the Alter Rebbe said before, he has no excuse. He has no excuse to sin just because he has a big Yetzer Hara. That's no excuse for him. But he's not talking about that person. He's talking about you. How do you view yourself in light of that person? You may have so much going for you. So Alter Rebbe is saying, just because you're not sinning as much as him, that doesn't make you a better person. It makes you a luckier person. You don't have the Yetzer Hara that he has. And when you're talking about battling the Yetzer Hara, we'll learn next week a little more about this. Turns out that our battles are not so nice either. We're not winning them so much. We're not winning them also so well. So I'm not sure anymore who's better and who's worse. Bemet. So we'll stop here, and we'll continue next Sunday. We'll hopefully conclude chapter 30 next Sunday. So have a wonderful rest of Hanukkah, everyone, and a wonderful